Conrad, an associate professor of history at UT Arlington, and I'm here with Dr. Ken Roemer, professor emeritus of English, also at UT Arlington. It's November 17th, 2025, and we're in special collections in the library at UT Arlington in Arlington, Texas. This interview is a part of UTA's Voices Unscripted oral history collection. So I wanted to begin by asking where you are from originally and what was it like growing up there?
Oh, I'm from Long Island, New York. Every once in a while that sneaks into my verbiage. Very small town, East Rockaway. When I was in third grade, they told me that it was 8,000 people. Now it has exploded to 10,000 people. So it's very, very small, but it was very important to my academic career, how I behave at UTA, because since it was so small, you had opportunities to do everything. You could be in football, basketball, track, you could be in musicals, and so that means that instead of being a super duper duper specialist, I still go back to that feeling of, and it was a small town, people, everybody knew each other, but excellent teachers, really good teachers. We did full, 30-page research for our senior year. So I'm quite happy. Certainly not as, it didn't prepare me for the diversity of students at UTA. But in one way it did. The majority were Catholic, Irish, and Italian. The next biggest group was Jewish, and the minority was Protestant. So it's a sort of a flip of where I am right now. But I'm really, and I met my wife there too, so that was another good thing about it.
Okay. When you were growing up?
Yes, we met. I was a junior and she was a sophomore, and we were in a musical together, and I fell in love with the character. And it was a couple, I don't know, probably a month or so after, I had to separate the two of them. So yeah, I have, even though I've been away and really do not have any desire to go back and live there, it's very formative to who I am.
Can you say a little about your family life and how that influenced your pursuit of a career as a professor?
I'm laughing because for that small town, we had a very unusual family. Unusual because and I've written some about this, my mother in 1944 got a divorce from my father, which was not done at that time, went to Reno without a job or anything, and because of the accident to the passenger she was sitting next to on the train, who severely twisted her ankle, she ended up being a maid at a dude ranch for very wealthy divorcees. This was ironic because when my mother was very young, she was very wealthy, but that was pretty much lost in the Depression. So here she was, mopping the floors for these divorcees and making a really good friend with an African-American maid. So she had gone through a big change. She was born in 1906. So she lived through the Depression, World War I, World War II, and had gone from up to lower, or maybe not lower class, middle class. And that shaped her in a lot of ways. She was an artist who went blind. And after that, she continued to do things, including directing a museum. So it was a really good model for me. You can have a disability and still go on. My dad came from a German family, went to Harvard, became an engineer. For a while, he was a research engineer. And I found out years later, because he didn't have top secret, but he had secret clearance, so I couldn't ask a lot of questions. But I found out that he worked at a project of anti-gravity. So I don't know if they were going to float the tanks or what they were going to do. But he was an engineer. And it was a very solid family. I had two brothers from the first marriage. One excelled at sports, the other excelled at music. And they were sort of like mythical to me because they were 13 and 15 years older. But, I always, was sort of competing with them and could never come close on either one of those areas, although I've done both. So I sort of went in the middle with academics. But it was an untypical family, especially because my first babysitter was named Little Moose, fell asleep. We had visiting tribal chairs and visiting, today they'd be called the performing chiefs in our family, some that had done movies together. And instead of going to the Catskills for vacations, we went to South Dakota to the Crow Creek Reservation. So it was an unusual family because of the divorce situation, because of the contacts with Native communities, but it was very close. My experience was I always felt loved, always felt supported, and never tell me, oh, you've got to do this when you grow up. So I was very fortunate about the town I was in and extremely fortunate about my family.
So tell me about your time in college at Harvard, and was there a particular professor or course that was influential to you?
Yes. My first 6 weeks or so at Harvard were not enjoyable. I was just scared, really scared and lonely. And then, in part because of track, I threw things. I was 40 pounds heavier and I lifted weights, but I still wasn't big enough to really be, really good. So I had that community. But in terms of different courses that really engaged me, very lucky, one of my professors was Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist. And what I saw in that, he would say, he looked at himself as an agnostic, or I remember one day in class he said, well, if you pray, who you were praying to? And yet, from my viewpoint, he was one of the most spiritual persons I ever met. He was so in love with the universe. And so, so that just, I wanted to be an astronomer when I was 7 years old, so all my courses were in astronomy. But in terms of the impact of my career, probably it was in my senior year, an American history course. And the first paper was about colonization and the impact on Native communities. And I really got pissed off. I started writing that first academic paper and I said, I can't do this. So I wrote a short story about what if the Native Americans had invaded Europe and how it, and I went through and I said, I don't give a damn. I mean, I can't, and I gave it to him. And I waited, and I got it back. And there was a note on the back, and he gave me an A. And he said, if you will promise to do papers like this for the rest of the semester, you can keep this A, because I really liked it. I mean, it fit factually. But that got me interested, too, in interdisciplinary stuff. I was doing sort of a literary. And so I started in my senior year to looking for American studies or American civ programs. And it was probably that experience and the fact that the professor didn't give me an F, which he could have, that said, okay, I want to look at interdisciplinary. So that's probably one of the main reasons. Yale and Penn were the two best. But Yale was quite traditional. They were history literature. Yeah. Penn, anthropology, sociology, music, all sorts of stuff. And a quick anecdote. I got rejected pretty quickly at Harvard because, a lot of reasons. One, the competition, obviously. But two, I filled out my application and I was printing it. and you had to say 2 faculty members you'd talked with. And in big letters, I put Gail Thane Parker, who, by the way, a few years later became the president of Bennington at 29, a rock star. But then I also met with Kenneth Lind, who was a really big shot in the history department. But I wrote his name little tiny, because it wouldn't fit. And then I found out later that Kenneth Lind hated Gail Thane Parker because she was always questioning him in seminars, and she was usually right. So I don't think that endeared me. But I went to Penn, and I loved the interdisciplinarity. It was in Philadelphia. I loved studying in Philadelphia. So those experiences, the astronomy course with the enthusiasm, the interdisciplinary, and then the fact that I went to Penn instead of some other places.
Can you say a little bit more about how your training in that American Civ program at Penn shaped kind of who you became as a scholar?
Yes, because always in my mind, whatever I wrote, I tried to think or taught, how does this fit in with multi-dimensional culture at that time? So that really did affect how I taught American literature. But just as much of an influence, when I came here, it was a 4-4 load, and every new professor had to teach freshman comp. And that was really good for me because I happened to pick a really good book, The Complete Stylist. It's out of fashion now, but that helped me to write. But the concept of how does the literature fit into culture? How does that political event fit into culture? Matter of fact, so much of the historical cultural background, I don't think I ever told you this, that in the 70s when it really got horrible in English for a while, I seriously considered moving over to history. And the history faculty was, my degree was in American Civ, so and they were interested in though I eventually did not. But so I was, but on the other hand, I have to say this too, I was always very interested because of my undergraduate courses in close reading and doing very careful close reading, because I figured if an author had put all that effort into his or her writing, I'm not going to just blow it and immediately jump to culture. How does it work together? But the pen was a big impact on how my research, and the fact that Penn allowed me as part of my dissertation orals to do Navajo acculturation, because I'd worked on the reservation, well, actually in Gallup. That was another thing that encouraged me.
So what brought you to UT Arlington in 1971? Or I guess say a little bit more about that process and how you ended up here.
Actually, I could have bragged and said I wrote one letter, my first letter, and got a really good job. Because what brought me here was at that time, and this is one of the things that I wrote in my little unpublished history of the department, we were really big on journals. And one of the journals was American Literary Realism. Matter of fact, I remember I had friends in English who were taking their masters, and part of it was a short answer thing. And one of the questions was about American literary realism. So I said, and to some degree, it was not quite a good old boy network, but we didn't have any job listings as to, I sent out 140 applications. Wow. 85% came back. Gee, great credentials, but we don't have anything. We just don't have anything. But what happened in this case, the editor Clayton Eichelberger, who was one of my mentors, he wrote to all the American literature, American history, American studies journals at that time and said, do you have any new recent PhDs who've had any editorial experience, who might be able to become a managing editor? And I was lucky, and I was the assistant editor at American Quarterly at that time. And also I had some teaching experience because one of my colleagues in the American Civ cheated and in fact got kicked out of the university. And so I took over a class for no pay, but you know, it got me on it. But one of my other mentors, Henny Cohen, who was the editor of American Quarterly at that time, he said, yes, we have this assistant editor. And so Clayton Eichelberger contacted me. And as I say, that was right in the beginning. And I wrote a letter of application. You know, I had to wait because they were doing a national search. But you know, it's so different now in terms of all the information, for better or worse, that new applicants have. But so the fact that it was the only place, I mean, Brown said, we're really interested in you, but we were going to either hire 2 assistant professors or 1 big fish. And I got a note and they said, we got our big fish. And then I got others that said, we really like you, but we don't even know what our budget is. But UT Arlington said, yep, you got two weeks to make up your mind. And that was the only offer. And we just had our first child, you know, and we said, okay, we're going to go for this. So it was the fact that it was the only concrete job offer, and it was working with a journal and working with a professor that I came to respect tremendously. So I was very fortunate.
So what was UTA and the English department more specifically like in the 1970s when you arrived?
Let me start with the general one, because it's important. We had what we called the Newcomers Club and the Faculty Wives Club. You know, today you wouldn't have this. The Newcomers Club was wonderful because right from the beginning, I knew people in history, I knew people in business, I knew people in engineering, I knew people in art. And you were only supposed to be in these newcomers clubs, I think, for 2 or 3 years, but it was so good, we extended. So it really gave me a university feel and actually led to my early promotion. It was really bizarre. The English department did something that you should never do. They put me on the tenure and promotion committee, and I was an untenured faculty member. Things like that happened then. And I got annoyed because one of my friends in business, who was just a new PhD, he was getting promoted after 3 years. So we came to one of our meetings and I asked our chair at that time, Emery Estes, who had a big influence on me, I said, I think you need to write a letter to the equivalent of the provost, who's vice president, and say, for new professors, brand new, you really need to keep uniform, you know, the 5, 6 years. Write that letter so we can at least have uniformity. Came back the next meeting and put me up for tenure. And at first, I said, this is going to cause a lot of tension in the department, which it did. It really did. So at first I said, don't do that. And then I came home, opened the door, and there was our 2-year-old child and my wife with an enormous belly, the other one on the way. And I said, I have a responsibility to support these people. And so I went ahead and did it. But that was just sort of a fluky thing. I eventually got the credentials, so under the regular system, because I had quite a few publications then, but the book came a little bit later. But that was because of this Newcomers Club. I had this big community, which was just wonderful. English department was something a little bit different. And when I tried to write this history, and I focused on this time, I stepped back and said, wait a minute, you cannot be judgmental. Because what was happening at that time at UTA, it started, I guess it was 1965, 66, when UTA became part of the UT system. Huge changes. In the English department, we had 50 tenure track or tenured people. Quite a few of them only had master's degrees. Really no interest in scholarly publication. On the other hand, there was another group that did have some and did a lot with critical editions and journals. But for that group of people who had been here for maybe 20, 25 years, who had never been encouraged to publish, all of a sudden, whomp, we're now in the UT system, and we're going to divide you into people who could teach graduate courses and people who could not teach graduate courses. It was, in hindsight, this was really tough. These were some really good teachers, and they were doing what they were told to do, and they were teaching at least 4-4, and then all of a sudden, this came down. And then I come along with a couple other people, and assuming that, oh, you have to hit the road publishing. So that did cause tensions, and it was even geographic. In the Carlisle Hall, there was one wing that had all the publications and the critical editions, and what is it? Heinemann Collator, a very, very, to compare different texts. And one of them, who was chair for only 8 months, he was pretty full of himself. And then you had another group who were in this class who had been teaching for a long time and really forced to change. And then sort of a middle group with some interest, but it was real, huge tension. And there was an underground newsletter that was, and I'm going to have to censor myself a little bit. I was often in it, coming from Bent Nose University, because I taught native lit, and my nickname was Chief something or other. And there were cartoons. This is supposed to be unscripted, right?
It is.
All right. I'll give you an example. And this is why I think the chair of our department didn't want me to write. There were cartoons in it. And then there was one guy, Harry Beaudry, his door had a lot of cartoons on it. And I came by one day, and there was a picture of a guy bent over backwards so that his head was up his rear, okay? And then the caption underneath, where did that Pulitzer go? Because my first book was nominated for a Pulitzer. And I had several reactions at the same time. Part of me was pissed off, but the artwork was really good. But today there might have been lawsuits and all sorts of things. But there was that type of, there was a lot of tension, people considering lawsuits. And it got so bad with me. I rode my bike at that time, and I would start thinking things that I wanted to happen to people. And I said to myself, if I'm doing this early in my career, you're going to become a sick person. So I didn't go to a therapist, but what I did, I started writing short stories. So when the feelings of anger, they were terrible short stories, terrible, but it just got me out of that. And at the same time, there was a group in the faculty, especially the chair, who was very supportive of me, and Clayton Eichelberger, that was very supportive of me. And most of the faculty really supported teaching native lit and utopian literature. I had one faculty member who would come up to me and say, how's your shit lit class coming? And another one who would greet me in the elevator with woo. But most people thought it was a little bit weird. But the chair of the department, Emery Estes, what luck. He was probably the only chair of an English department who was Native American in the country. He did not wear his Cherokee heritage on his sleeve.
Yeah.
But he knew my background, and he cornered me. I know exactly where in Carlisle Hall. And he said, we need some special topics courses. Could you teach an American Indian literature course? There were no textbooks or anything. But I have colleagues who have done 1 or 2 books, and maybe they taught a course in Native Lit once every 2 years. I developed 8 courses here with great encouragement. And so, yes, there was tension, and sometimes I was the butt of the tension, but there was some really good support. And there are many English departments I wouldn't have been able to teach a lot of utopian literature. You know, I did my freshman composition. That's one of the toughest courses to teach. But so one of the many reasons I stayed here my whole career is, one, the job market. I have applied to a couple other places, and University of Chicago even contacted me about my book at one time, but they never panned out. So I've done a lot visiting professors and lecturing in other countries. But I just had so much freedom here. And then after that real tension period of the 70s going into early 80s, compared to other English departments, except for one part of the early 90s, when the rhetoric literature thing started, it's been, a place of, it's very collegial. It's been very collegial compared to others. And I like the students, and they got more and more diverse, and I liked it even better.
What was it like teaching at UTA in the 70s and 80s? What were the students like at that time?
Most of them were from the area. Most of them were white. Many of the males had maybe one generation removed from farming. And they were, in some ways, they were better prepared than our students today. Most of them had some really good writing. In my freshman composition classes, there were problems. And a lot of them had the standard 5-paragraph, paper but they were good. I mean, I had Zach. Zach came to class with his dog and no shoes on. And that was okay. That was okay. The age diversity, that's another thing I really liked. And and this was a bit in the beginning, and even as it got into the 80s, even more. The extreme, I had, my oldest student was 74. But the ones that I really appreciated, this was my first class. She was a 36-year-old grandmother, and she had put her kids through, and now it was her turn to do it. And I had quite a few women, and especially in the general classes, the freshmen and senior, who were in that situation, and they came back, and they were good. I mean, they were hardworking. They were good. The students, I never try to remember if I had any. Melinda Ramos, second year here, absolutely gorgeous. But she did one really rotten thing. She came to the final exam with a see-through blouse, which completely, not totally see-through, but it's kind of okay.
But quite see-through.
Which I think the men in the class, it probably took them 10 minutes to get back working. And she was really smart. Went on to be an anchor at a local TV station. I talked to her later, and she said she quit that because they didn't take advantage of her incredible writing skills. They just wanted a pretty face to read the news. The other thing I liked about students was a lot of them were working. Most of them were working. Some of them in really interesting jobs. I had a journalist who had to cover the Mexican-U.S. border. And he had, when we were talking about any literature related to that, he had all sorts of things to bring. And the fact that I did a lot of group discussions, and every single group I tried to have someone, you know, in their 30s, 40s, or 50s in it, which added, and in my opinion, it adds as much as any sort of ethnic diversity, having that age diversity. So the big difference is, when I first came here, it was mostly white students. And now there's really much more a rich mixture.
So you have had, I think, an unusually varied career in terms of your teaching and research interests, from utopian studies to Native American literatures. So I want to ask you about kind of how you became interested in and engaged in those fields. But I thought I'd maybe start with Native American literature, since you mentioned that being an area where you had support, but also then some people that critiqued it. And this was really early on in terms of Native literary studies and so on. So can you say a little bit more about how you got interested in Native American literatures and what it was like to kind of work in the field at that time?
I got into it. I do not claim Native lineage, but from birth, it was all around me. And then, as I said, I had the lucky opportunity because of the chair. And he said, he didn't quite invite me. He said, "You are going to." And what that meant, I got in right on the ground floor. And so I was involved in the creation of the first association to study Native American literatures. And that was really lucky. And then I got positive response from the students. And then on top of that, and this came later, this was actually in the early 90s, I was sitting in my office one day, and 3 of our Native students came in, the 2 Wolf brothers and Joe Bohannon. And they were very upset because the advisors for the Native American Student Association, they were very disappointed with them. So they said, "Would you be our advisor?" I was kind of overcommitted in other things, and I'd never been an advisor. So I said yes. And I was lucky at the beginning, because Joe Bohannon especially, who went on to be president of an unaccredited, the Pawnee College, he did a lot of the stuff. I didn't have to do too much. But after he left, I had to do more. So my teaching was reinforced by the student activities, was reinforced by the conventions and the associations. And it really, I felt it was wonderful, because when I came to UTA in an English department, I said, anything related to Native communities, it's going to be extracurricular. It's going to be, and I did some clothing drives, because we were very lucky. We sent directly to families we knew, and they would send us the measurements, because sometimes clothing drives, they just send everything everywhere. But then I had the opportunity to teach it too. So there was a lot of external, internal family support going for it.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the Native American Students Association and kind of how it came to be and how you came to be involved with it in those early years?
It started really with Joe Bohannon. He was an organizational man. He liked committee meetings, and he liked putting things together. And he had several others. Diana Stedman, that's her former name. She has another name now. Atwood. Anyway, they had a team. She was good at paperwork, and he was good at getting people together. Started off was going to be a softball, there's going to be a softball league. And then, he decided, okay, this needs to be a student. So in 1994, we did the whole thing, our bylaws and a constitution, which is terribly out of date. But anyway, it's there. And and at the beginning, especially because of Joe, I mean, we'd had like 26 people at a meeting. And we had powwows, much smaller than now, but we had enough people where the students did all the cooking. And it was just, and right from the beginning, the thing that really made us a good group, a lot of community connections. You know, I had some, Joe had a lot, the students had a lot, so it was always community. And at the beginning, we had a powwow, and it was in November. We changed that because we got support from the upper administration to send students to ACES, which is the STEM big national group for students. And that was in November. And we were
for American Indian students,
yeah,
right?
Right, exactly. And it was just too much to have that conference, and so that's when we moved it to the spring. And I was not at the very first powwow. It's a little different from now. It was someplace in Fort Worth. This is another one of our mentors, Eugene Brown, an artist, sculptor, and storyteller. And he told me about this. He said it was pretty small, but it was going to be outside, and it was a good place, but it had a little bit of declivity in the ground, and it rained the day before. So it was one of these mud powwows. And then gradually it was moved to UTA. And for most of the time at UTA, it was in the Blue Bonnet room. And again, university has supported us right from the beginning. I can't emphasize this enough. And right from the highest level, presidents. So we got it in the big Blue Bonnet room, ballroom, for free. And then eventually that got too big. And then we moved it over to the MAB. And now, I mean, if I'm looking at changes, social media, COVID hurt us because, and privacy rules hurt us. Because it used to be, sometimes I did too much as an advisor. My wife told me all the time, let the students do it, they have to learn. But I got phone numbers, not just emails, phone numbers of all the Native students. So we could have, a little group of us would call everybody, and then we'd all meet in person. And that was really good. But then, with cell phones and with email and then COVID, everything was online, virtual, either Zoom or Teams. And it was really convenient, but, it wasn't the same as meeting face to face. So what usually happens at a lot of our meetings, there's maybe 4 or 5 or 6 people, and sometimes there are more faculty members and staff than students. And again, it's because they work. It's not on our website, but we are a working class university in the sense that almost all the students have some sort of financial responsibilities. So it's hard for them to do that. But come powwow time, everybody gets there. And then recently, and now we have a fantastic president, but I just worry he doesn't get enough sleep, Stephen Silva Brave. And so we have we're in Native American Month right now. We have 3 or 4 events, including one that I had to miss, which was one of your excellent talks. And so we have a lot there, and then I think the most marvelous day at UTA, if I had to, I wouldn't say when I got full professor, I wouldn't say when I got associate professor, I wouldn't say when I got teaching awards. Right at the top was early October 2022, when we inaugurated, what's the word, the courtyard for our land acknowledgement. It was a dream. I always wanted something at that roundhouse, and I hope some history project gets into that roundhouse on campus right near the library. And then I didn't know too much at all about land acknowledgements, but Les Ridingen, our recently way too young deceased advisor, he got into this advising thing. And then we had a type of mentor over at TCU, Scott Langston, who was really knowledgeable about land acknowledgements. So we worked on that. And then I had some connections, and I call him the czar of the physical plan, John, and he thought it was a good idea. And as far as I know, we're the only university that has this. And that day, you know, both the president and the provost, the mayor was there. I had connections with most of the past presidents, and they came from different parts of the country for that day and spoke. And I know Les Riding he was on cloud nine. I was on cloud nine. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. So personally, the support that I've gotten in this Native American, we've had bad times. We've had threats against me, threats against the powwow, you know, because there's Vine Delorier, who was one of my heroes, or a writer, said that if you have 10 Native Americans in a room, you're going to have 13 factions. And so there's been tension, and there's been head staff changes the day of the powwow because of threats and things. So tension, but my experience with the Native American student group has been really good. I've stepped way back. I can't sign anything officially anymore because I'm retired, et cetera, et cetera. But they had a retirement party for me in 2019 when I retired, and it was really, really nice. Except Christy Willis, one of the past, who's gone on to be a leader in the community, she came to me after and said, you can retire from teaching and grading. You don't have to do a lot of writing if you want, but you cannot retire from being an informal advisor for the rest of your life. So that's been a really, you know, I've really stepped back from that. We have such a good president right now, and we have you here, and we have Leah. You know, we have people who are really dedicated. So, you know, I should and can step back. But that's obviously been one of the major joys of my experience at UT Arlington.
So tell me more about utopian studies and what drew you to utopian studies.
Actually, it's a precise moment that it all began. Ninth or 10th grade in high school, history professor always went a little beyond and had us read some Plato. And I remember standing, I don't know what was going on in my mind, standing next to my dresser in my bedroom and saying, wouldn't it be interesting, what if you really could organize your life in a way that you could identify what you were really good about, how you could contribute it, and then you could do that. You had a society where you could do that. And then later on, and it wasn't until graduate school when I was picking my dissertation, I'll never forget this, Mary Murphy, who was the leading scholar on American philosophy at that time at Penn, he wanted to have a talk with me about what is your dissertation, and I said, well, I think I want to do, I want to look at a lot of the book reviews of late 19th century authors. And he was really quiet, and he said, that could be really boring, couldn't it? and at the same time, I had, again, it was this American course where I did the fiction thing. And I started seeing over and over from early America, people wanting the exceptionalism, the city on the hill. And I said, how many utopian ideas influenced. And so, and again, my fellowship was going to run out in a year. I had good support. And, you know, as I said, one child and a wife was pregnant, so I got to finish this. And I looked and I said, the book said there are only 41 American utopias in the period I was going to look at, which was the boom period of utopia. I said, hey, I can knock this off. Started doing research on some of these reviews and others. And when I got up to 160, I said, I better stop. But I just got really fascinated with the ideas, some of which are way radical for what we have right now. For example, paying mothers full salary to raise family. Full salary. I wrote about that. And again, my career has been checked with luck. Luck. Okay, that was the late 60s, early 70s. In most parts of the country, that's when the real 60s were. You know, in Berkeley, maybe early, but in the rest of the country. So there was a lot of interest in utopian stuff. So when my book came out, the London Times gave it a full-page review. One of the 2 or 3 top experts in the country nominated it for a Pulitzer. The Chronicle of Higher Education had the whole thing on it, and it was just in. The last utopian book that I did came out. I think it was actually more innovative. A couple real rave reviews and not much else. And then just last year, I had a new updated edition for that first book. I don't think it got any reviews. So you know, so it's
sometimes it's about timing.
It is really about timing. So that gave me a lot of encouragement. And then again at UTA, they said, okay, you could teach a course in utopian literature. You know, we have classic people like Sir Thomas More and Plato, and science fiction writers and people like Ursula Le Guin. So I got support, real support there. And I would go for 2 or 3 years and say, I'm just going to focus on utopia. And then Louise Erdrich or somebody would come out with a new Native American novel and say, oh, that's so good. And then I'd focus. So this is my East Rockaway High School thing, you know, doing. So I was always behind in both. But when it came down to my last semester at UTA, Tim Morris, who was in charge of the curriculum that time, and said, you compiled enough credits doing dissertations, so in your last semester here, you only teach 1 course. So I went back and forth, utopia, and I went to Tim and said, I'm teaching 2 courses. I can't choose. So I was lucky enough. There are a lot of universities that, especially in the 70s and 80s, utopia and native, I wouldn't have gotten much support. And here, I got a lot of support.
Yeah. One of the interesting experiences you've had is lecturing abroad, but also living and teaching in Japan. Can you talk more about those experiences and how they influenced your career?
Japan was, we were living, I've taught there twice. The second time was in a prestigious school near Tokyo. First was, well, I guess they would say it's like being in Wyoming, but a very traditional place, one of the most traditional cities in Japan. The 4 of us, except for the Mormon missionaries and 1 retired Air Force officer, we were the only. Luckily, all of us, including the kids, have had acting and stage performance, so we don't mind being watched, because we were watched. Everything. It was a steep learning curve for me. For example, I learned that in a lot of my literature courses, 7 to 10 pages a week assigned. As much as I would tell them, read for content. Don't worry so much about, every word and the grammatical. They had been so conditioned for that detail that it was almost cruel to them. So we worked with small things, and they would really go through these. And I taught the first course in Native American literature in Japan there. I had a lot of videos with storytellers. Probably not the first course related to utopia. So that was good. We had a lot of support. Another lucky thing, students went with my children to class for the first couple of months. And, kids pick up another language so much faster than adults. We knew my son had it when he was talking in his sleep in Japanese. But so I did have to adapt my teaching. I think that the most difficult thing in terms of student-teacher relationship was it was oral interpretation. It was speaking in English. I found out that in the past, most of those courses were actually writing. They didn't speak. So, but I said, well, we're going to speak. And so we did. And I also had to teach a phonetics class with a textbook in Japanese. So I went back on my singing experience, how you pronounce things. But at the end of the oral speaking class, I had a one-on-one, which is nervous enough for, American students. They were really terrified. So I think I've never been so gentle and they were all good students. So I had to adapt in terms of how much I could teach, and they were really interested in the Native American courses, and they excelled in a writing exam, a writing class based on N. Scott Malmaday's Way to Rainy Mountain, where you have a personal experience, family stories, and some history. I had a student whose family had lived in his house for 9 generations. And they had the storytelling part where Native literature just came so easily to them because they had it. They had all sorts of stories and they wanted to share that. So, there were things, and I was learning then. So it was, and the classes were small. And it was powerful experience.
So you've won a number of teaching awards over the time of your career, but I wonder if there's, thinking back, if there's a particular course that you're especially proud of that you developed over time, and what kind of methods and activities did you incorporate in that course that really resonated with students?
I'll give you the runner-up and then the one.
Okay.
And the runner-up is because a professor at UTA, Mary Lynn Crow, in the education department, she said, you should compete for this Exxon Teaching Innovation Fellowship, which I did, and I got it. But it was taught by engineers, and it was all problem solving. So basically what I did in most of my courses was there would be, even great big class of 100, maybe 20 minutes of a lecture in PowerPoint. But then after that, they worked in small groups, even with the big classes, they made a lot of noise. And the class before, I would have given them a problem related to the text that we're working on, that they were supposed to discuss. And I encouraged them to write down notes so when you came to class, So after my lecture, they would go to for about, if this was an hour and a half course, for at least 15 minutes an exchange. And then they would report back. This was really, it worked in upper level classes, but I was most delighted with the big sophomore American Lit class, because we had, one of those classes I had 100 students, one English major, but they brought all sorts of different viewpoints to it and different ages. So those group discussions were good, and then there'd be a person appointed from each group to report, and then they would build on that. And at the end of the class, they'd have 5 minutes to write down answers to 2 questions. What do you think the main focus of this class was? And what particular specific thing did engage you? And sometimes it was a little minor thing that somebody might have said. And then I'd come back the next class, and I had an amazing TA one time who kind of organized this all together and gave them a report on what they said. And if they really didn't know, if they didn't get what I was the main focus, I would have to step back and say, I screwed up somehow, and give them. So that and the other thing I did that worked was the syllabus was very detailed. I sent them emails about each, and I put it on the blackboard, because some people were blackboard people, some people, So that was in general what I did. The one class that I think was my most important class was the one I was before least qualified to teach. It was an autobiographical writing course based on this book that I mentioned, Way to Any Mountain, where students, it was autobiographical, but they had to relate it to, yes, something that happened in their lives, but something in their community or their culture, storytelling, and then get some facts behind this. And I had one Cambodian student who delayed graduation because she wanted to write about it. She produced a 100-page thing. And I had students who went to Mexico during spring break because they wanted to get. I had a student, her whole focus was the fact that she was a preemie and how that affected her legs and the rest of her life, and the stories about that. A story, I remember in the introductory paragraph, I quit drugs when I was 14. He was raised in a hippie community. And so it gave them, and I knew the course was working when they kind of forgot about grades. They had the opportunity to revise and revise and revise and revise. So I don't think anybody failed that course. There were some C's, but mostly they were A's and B's because they were. And I had some students who got in touch with brothers and sisters who didn't know they were brothers and sisters, and the way this was secrets in the family, and they just sent them what they wrote. And one of them even, it ended up in a family reunion. And so it was pretty labor intensive to read all these, but it was so much more interesting than a lot of other. So I, not qualified, no MFA and stuff like that. But I felt for the students that was probably the most meaningful course I ever taught.
It's interesting to me sometimes how teaching and our own writing can be connected. And I'm curious, I know you have done autobiographical writing yourself now, so did that come out of that course, or what led you to work on your
on that course, or the autobiographical writing?
The autobiographical writing, I guess. Were they connected to each other? And then maybe say a little bit more about that book project that you've done.
Yes, they're connected because I was so impressed with Mohamed's book, The Way to Any Mountain. One of my books is about that book.
Yeah.
And because of my rather unusual family background, there were stories there. But actually, what got me into the writing was the Japanese experience. Because even though I was teaching one semester, I taught 7 courses. I said, oh boy, that's terrible. No, one course was with some librarians. They met once a week, and it was nice. But I did have some extra time, and I was having some unusual experiences in Japan meeting, and I said, gosh, I have this time and I have something to write about. I should write. So the way Mamade influenced me, it is sort of chronological, but it's in clusters. There's one main piece that may be 10 pages long, and then these satellites around it, and then photography, and some very sophomoric attempts at haiku around that. And it was really enjoyable to write, and I got the first draft done probably in 1984. It was published in 2003. A lot of things in between, because it was kind of unusual. And when I sent it to U.S. publishers, they didn't know what to make of it.
Remind me, what was the title of this?
It was the English title is Sidewalkers Japan. Hiro de Dieta. But the Japanese knew that they kind of liked this. There's a term for it that means miscellany, where you put these things together. And again, lucky. I had a real good friend who had published a lot, and he had connections with this commercial publisher. Showed it to him, and the first reaction was, well, there's not a straight narrative through this. And then he read it again and said, oh, okay, there is this, and included some of my dreams and other things. And he said, yes, but there's one thing wrong with it. I want more of your photography. So I gave him more photography. And this is a learning experience too. Luckily, my friend introduced me to one of the leading Japanese literary critics at that time. And he knew that I was working on this. And he said, Dr. Roemer, you're not going to get a contract. And you probably will never get any royalties. He had done, I think, 13 books. And I forgot, he said maybe 4 or 5 he actually got royalties. So I was prepared. But I know that it was published. I have some copies, and my son and daughter-in-law, one of the times they were over in Japan, because he's taught there quite a bit. They were in a bookstore, and there was the book. So that got me interested. And then the second thing that really got me interested was when my parents both died 2 years apart, 1 year from each other. I had to go through the house. My dad had lived there for 82 years. I figured 7 generations had either lived there, visited, or dumped their stuff there. And I found all this stuff. And, I had this question. We had some scandals and tragedies in the back of our family, so I was very delicate. I don't want to ask questions. But, basic question. Why were we so interested in Indians and Native Americans and Native communities? And there are a lot of articles, and when I was really young, my mother would take me to charity. They had charity TV shows. We won a side of beef one time on a charity TV show. They don't do that on TV anymore for the reservation. So I started writing stories about that, and it took me a whole year. Luckily, UTA gave me, one of those semester off. There were about 1,000 documents put together, and I got those. And I've revised it probably 40 times, and it's still unpublished. I've gotten close several times. University of Nebraska Press was really interested at one point, and some others, and more recently Grove Atlantic, which is a prestigious. They gave it a reading, but it again, because of its structure and a lot of things. It's also with native communities, there are cycles, just like with Utopia. Sometimes Indians and Indian country are really in, and then other times, as Vine Delory say, natives are invisible. They're invisible ethnic group. So, but I'm patient, and in the back of my mind, my fail-safe is that if this never gets published, I didn't do what I should have done. I should have sent it out to little other places first. I learned a heck of a lot, and I learned a heck of a lot of how difficult it is to really do good autobiographical writing. So, so it's still not published, but I'm still working towards it.
Well, there's so much I could ask you about, but I know you have a new digital project with the libraries that is being unveiled tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I know it's a part of a much longer relationship you've had with the library with your interest in literary canons and kind of the history of literary canons, among other topics. So I wondered if you could say more about the genesis of this project and
Yeah, and of course, again, another luck here is this library and how people have helped me. It was a graduate class and early American literature, and at that time, there were a whole series of new anthologies that were really doing some interesting experimental things. So, and I'll be talking about this tomorrow, I wanted to show the students how a literary anthology begins can really set in motion a narrative, assumptions about not only what American literature is, but what America is. So I eventually cobbled together, I guess I had 36 anthologies, and I photocopied the tables of contents because and so I had this fairly thick thing. And Matthew Levy, one of the graduate students, who had gotten into digital stuff early, he said, Dr. Roemer, you could save a lot of trees and save students some money if you digitize this. Oh, really? What's that? So he, and then I had, I am very lucky, had another student in that class who I think will be there tomorrow, Richard Flack, who was really into web design. He now has his own company. So what he did is Matt and he did a lot of scanning, and then they used Richard's platform, and it was quite primitive, no counter, and that was for several years. And we'd add a few and add a few, and then we'd do nothing, and then the university closed the site down because they felt it was vulnerable. I don't know. And then in 2017, I gave the library a grant, and they had, and I hope she's going to be there tomorrow, Ramona Holmes. She was the head of a lot of the open access. And they, and another guy named Andrew, they showed me what could really be done. And we migrated, and this took a while, all the stuff that we had, because we were up to probably 50 or 60 anthologies then. And again, the assumption is anthologies are one of the many ways in our culture where we pass on to the next generation what we think you should know about not only literature, but what you should know about America. So it's that transfer, and that's why I think they're important. So that was the first, really making more sophisticated. And then the last 2 years, I gave the university another grant. The College of Liberal Arts gave me a grant, though, for graduate students at one point. And that's where I suddenly realized it's really good to have this core of anthologies But in order to really see the dialogue, a dialogue, you have to put that next to American lit histories, because often the anthologists look at what's been written at histories and the narrative of America that they create, and they have to put that next to the scholars. And we have the American Literary Scholarship, and so we have not only table of contents, but all the indices, which shows scholars say, these deserve attention, and the topics deserve attention. Some of the topics are very different from the early ones. I mean, the one I'm going to show tomorrow, the index, has Lady Gaga in it, so it's a little different from some of the others. And then on top of that, the covers. The book covers send all sorts of messages. So the core is still, it's, I don't know, about 120, 130 anthologies now. But then there are actually 259 volumes around this to show all this, the dialogues. And then the last context for this, which has totally surprised me, is the usage. You'll see maps tomorrow that I'm going to show the library again provided. And it's up to, I think it's about 35,000 downloads, not just visits, downloads just in the last few months. And of course, number one is the United States. Number two is Brazil, by a huge, and then after that, China, Vietnam, Thailand, and Singapore. Why?
It's interesting.
I have my guesses. In the question and answer, I'll give you some of my guesses. And there's one in Timor, one download in Timor. Wow. But so it's really the sense of collaboration. And now that the project is that anybody who uses it, if they see either a mistake we made or something we should add, they're supposed to contact me or contact Jessica, who's in charge of that. So it's really been kind of exciting, It's not just the individual scholar working; it's this huge community.
Yeah. You mentioned that this project came out of a graduate class, and I know one important part of your career has been working with graduate students. The English department created a PhD program, has a PhD program. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about your experience with graduate students and your approach to mentoring PhD students in particular.
Because we've gone through, we first had a humanities program, which ticked off some people in history because it looked like there was too much emphasis on humanities, not enough on history. So there was a little bit of split there. But so that was, and then that there were controversies down in Austin. That program was eliminated. And then we went to a more conventional PhD English program in rhetoric.
Do you remember when that change happened?
The humanities was going guns in the. Let me see if I.
No, I didn't mean to.
But I don't know. But that's a good question, because I think through the 80s, it was humanities, and it was sometime in the early 90s when there was that controversy. That whole program was dropped, and it came to a more traditional one. But 2 points about it. One, our traditional program has always been, especially recently, a little less traditional, because we have people like Tim Richardson, who is now the interim chair, and Kenton Ramsey, who was here with us. But people, and now we have new people, Doug Stark, and who are very interested in digital, very interested in social media. But to get more directly to your question, when I was graduate advisor for 6 years, and when the high school system had career development stepladders, that was a really good time for us in the English department, because we got a lot of good high school teachers in their late 20s, early 30s, who had good experience, were really smart, had jobs, and knew that with the master's degree they were going to get an income bump and the possibility of some other even better jobs. That was sort of a golden period, I think, and in terms of the students, because they felt secure, the jobs were there, etc. Well, it was mostly, I would say at least 70% women. A lot of them, again, who were going back, and some of those have gone off to be not in managerial positions too, or administrative positions. And that was, we all felt really good about that. And then, the job market has tightened. The other thing I liked about that was the maturity of the students and the mix of, young, early 20s and people 40s, even 50s, or my one graduate student who was 74. So that was it. It was a little bit more difficult. And in my last years, I still enjoyed all the graduate courses, but there was more insecurity, and that was that type of tension, and the fact that they would have to maybe have more outside teaching or other works than they would have otherwise. But I think they really enjoyed the unusual things I did. And now, because of liability, I would always take them to the utopian classes, to the White Hawk community, which is north of Denton. Very interesting community. And the whole class would go out there. Even they had to sign a liability. The first sentence was, this activity could involve in disease or death. Because you're driving cars there. But it's very unusual. It's mainly a sustainability that used ferrous concrete to build these round and interesting shaped. And they were off the grid for 15 years. Started out as a real hippie, and then but they had high school teachers, they had plumbers, they had electricians. So we did that, or they were willing to do 1 year, 1 weekend. I took them to that, and then the next one we went to, the Gaylord, that really glitzy, a very different view of what utopia could be. And even with some of the Native American projects or classes, they were willing to go along with certain unusual things, unusual speakers. Way in the beginning, I remember, I think this was an upper level course, we met in the cellar of a house in Fort Worth and met with the former leader of one of the most interesting intentional communities of the 70s, which still exists, Twin Oaks. And there was a type of, I really liked the type of camaraderie in my classes. And the stories, because of their life experiences, had, especially some of the older ones. So, but it was more secure earlier when all the jobs were there and the career ladder and all that. And there were still really good students, but there was always that little edge of, if you didn't have a job, getting a PhD really work at. Luckily, a lot of them, some of them had already computer jobs or teaching jobs.
Well, I have one last question for you,
Okay.
which is, what advice would you give a new professor starting out on their career at UTA today?
Oh, that's really tough. On the good side, and there are a lot of good sides, I would tell them, you have a lot of really good support systems here. Go to the library right away. Go to the library and get that support system. Number two, there are some incredibly good researchers and teachers at this university. The English department certainly has that. And if I were dictator of a university, I would require not only new professors, but every professor to at least once a year visit another professor's class. Not necessarily in your discipline, but so take advantage of that. Take advantage of the people in your department. Do that type of networking. The reason I emphasize that is because of it's so easy to do so much online right now. There is a tendency, and this is a huge change. Up until like 1991, Carlisle Hall was always full with people. So you could make these contacts. Now, I do go up to UTA quite a lot. And at certain times of the day, it's just empty. And library, get to know other people in the department. Be very sure, luckily in the English department, that you know exactly what the promotion requirements are in your department. So that you're not caught by surprises, or how important is the third year review, or don't be afraid to go to the department chair or a senior colleague and say, "How am I doing?" I mean, don't just see how you're doing. Be sure of that. We have had some professors in the English department, mainly in rhetoric, who they should have known, but they got blindsided. At the end, because so make sure you know that. But the library, get to really know, because we have such excellent teachers. The teaching center that we have now is more robust than it's ever been. So contact people there. Learn from your students. Try not to just lecture all the time. I would strongly recommend group discussions, problem solving, those things that really, help. So those are some of the things. The reason I groaned at the beginning is that it's tough to afford a house, to support a family. It's difficult. I think of my grandchildren, so that's why I groaned at the beginning, because I think, but the people we are hiring, at least in the English department, are really, really good, and I think they won't have difficulty in making it. But luckily, I think most of the young professors know all about this. And I'll end with this one final point, another reason I was lucky. The first week at graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, we were called into the director, and he said, "I'm going to tell you two things about this profession. One, for at least the next 40 years, the job market is going to be tough. to the point of being bad. True. 2, you will never make more than $35,000 a year. And if I go back and account for inflation, absolutely right. Because there are some people who make, stars who make 200 and 250,000, but usually the top is going to be 150, 170 or something like that. And most people, especially at state school, don't make that. So luckily, right at the beginning, even though this was a top program in an Ivy League school, we got the hard news. And so, Fitzgerald said a real brilliant person has 2 sides to the brain. So on the one side, keep all your enthusiasm up. You're going to get support here. On the other hand, there's that real world out there. So.
Yeah. Well,
This-
Dr. Roemer, thanks for speaking with us
Okay.
and sharing your unfiltered voice.
Yeah, I didn't even look at my